Oh, well, welcome. My name is Van Jones, and I am excited to be here tonight. We're going to have a pretty packed and full program. When you leave, you're going to be so smart about criminal justice and fired up, hopefully, to get involved in this fight if you're not already. I want to thank, before we get any farther, the sponsors of this incredible evening, Ben and Jerry's. But the person who I want to give that thanks and give that acknowledgement is not me. I want to bring somebody up from the Advancement Project, one of our most premier and outstanding civil rights, social justice, racial justice groups. And she is going to talk a little bit about the partnership between the Advancement Project and Ben and Jerry's. Please welcome to the stage Zerlene Hughes-Spurl from the Advancement Project.
Good evening. How are you all? Excellent. So you're all here for the ice cream, right? Well, just so you know, there will be free scoops of Ben & Jerry's when we're all done here. Are you guys excited now? Excellent. So again, my name is Zerlene Hughes-Spurl. I'm Managing Director of Communications with Advancement Project, and I'm really super excited to be here to welcome you on behalf of Ben & Jerry's and Advancement Project. Ben & Jerry's is not just a sponsor. They are a true advocate in social and racial justice and criminal justice reform. So much that they partnered with Advancement Project National Office, and we are a 20-year organization who has been dedicated to fighting for racial justice in the areas of education, immigration, policing, and voting rights. You guys know all about that stuff? If not, you'll learn this evening. Also, Ben & Jerry's is such a fierce advocate that they have created Justice Remixed. You guys heard about Justice Remixed? It is not only an ice cream, but it is a racial justice campaign, and we are hoping that you all help take action by eating the ice cream, purchasing the ice cream as proceeds go to Advancement Project National Office, and it's an opportunity to talk about justice for all. So with the next guest, I'll leave you all. Are you guys ready? Yeah. All right.
That's my truth. Wait, she took my papers. Wait. So, how are you guys? All right, as they bring me my papers back, what I will say is, two of my favorite things in the world, ice cream and justice. So give them another round of applause. Ben & Jerry's been on the front lines for a long time. They've been doing it for a long time. And thank you. It's a little ratchet. That's all right. So look, I'm excited about tonight. I've got a chance to do a lot of stuff in my life. I've got a chance to work for President Obama. I've got a chance to work with Prince, the rock star. I get to be on CNN. I've done a lot of cool stuff in my life. The great thing about doing things you believe in is you meet other people who are doing stuff that they believe in. And you want that in your life. You want people who are passionate, who are committed. And so pretty much everybody who's going to be on this stage, these are people I've been in the trenches with, people I've worked with when it's hard, when it's not popular. And their hearts have really been able to shine through. So you're going to hear tonight, so for instance, just throw out some of these names, Dwayne Betts and Marcus Bullock. These guys, unbelievable, formerly incarcerated. Dwayne is a poet, a lawyer. He's got a new book out called Felon, which has been reviewed all over the place. He's going to be here tonight. You're going to hear from him. Marcus, I believe these guys are related, but Marcus has an app called Flikshop, which is actually helping people behind bars. He was behind bars. He had a hard time staying in touch with his family. He got out and used technology to build an app to basically keep people in contact with each other. He's going to be here. Also, we've got Pamela Wynn. She is one of the most extraordinary advocates in the world formerly incarcerated, went through 10 years of hell, had all kind of bad stuff happen to her. A lot of people, when they get out of prison, the best they can do is try to just get on their own feet. She said, that's not enough. And she went back to fight the system. And she's been pushing these bills called Dignity for Incarcerated Women. And she got a huge victory in Georgia, which you're going to hear about. I love hearing from her. She's unbelievable. Also, you're going to hear us talking about something called the First Step Act. We'll talk about that a lot at the level of policy and politics. But it ain't just policy when you pass a bill like that. It ain't just policy, it's people. And we're going to have somebody on this stage who was behind bars just a couple months ago with a life sentence, no chance of ever walking free, breathing free air ever again because of the First Step Act. Lonnie Jones is going to be here with us tonight, and we're going to get a chance to hear about an organization that I love and help get started called Cut 50. So listen, just give a round of applause to the organizers to have this many amazing people on the stage. You know, I mentioned Cut 50. I'm actually the CEO of something called the Reform Alliance, started by Jay-Z and Meek Mill and a whole bunch of other people who you've probably heard of, focused on probation and parole reform, and we'll get to that. But the reason that I was able to get the job being the CEO for the Reform Alliance is because I helped to build something called Cut 50. And back when it was unpopular, back when it was considered almost an oxymoron to say bipartisan criminal justice reform, back when people said there's no way that Republicans and Democrats can come together and get anything done, let alone get something done for people behind bars who don't vote, can't vote, don't give donations. This is a completely ludicrous idea. This is just like 6 or 7 years ago. A woman named Jessica Jackson and myself and a guy named Matt Haney created something called Cut 50 to prove folks wrong, to prove that you could actually get people, the best people in both parties, to do something about this horrific nightmare. And over the past several years, Cut 50 has rolled up an incredible record of passing bipartisan criminal justice bills, depending on the math, almost as many as 20 bills in red states, purple states, and blue states, doing something about criminal justice reform and actually being able to build a network called an empathy network, grassroots, bottom up, at the local level, conservatives and liberals coming together to get legislation done. And I'm very proud of it. I'm proud that an idea that people thought was nuts is now it's almost like a cliche. Everyone, well, of course it's bipartisan. Of course! It wasn't, of course, 5 years ago when you said we was crazy. But when we fight, we win. When we fight, we win. And we've been winning. And I want to bring somebody to the stage who is the new leader for Cut 50. He's somebody who is himself formerly incarcerated, as I'm sure he'll mention. But he is he's an example of what happens when people who are directly impacted by the system, whose system is grabbed and choked and tried to drag off the face of the earth and put away and tried to bury alive, when those folks get a chance to come back out and talk about what they've seen and are given the opportunity to change laws and make a difference, it's unbelievable what's possible. So the next chapter for the Cut 50 story is going to be written by the next person whose voice you're going to hear. Give a rousing round of applause for my brother, Michael Mendoza.
Thank you, Vanna. I won't steal your papers this time. It's an honor and a privilege to stand here with you today. And, you know, standing here with you today, never in a million years would I thought to have been here. It reminds me of my 17th birthday when I found myself on a bus being shipped to the first adult prison with a life sentence. And the fact that people out here fought hard to change a bill in California that gave me hope and to prove that I was no longer that 15-year-old kid anymore, that's what gave me hope to come out here and fight myself. Because as Van said, when we fight, we win. And so it's a privilege to stand here as a national director of an amazing organization that is here to serve you and to uplift the stories of other formerly incarcerated leaders, because we still have a fight left. So it's a privilege, and thank you.
I love that guy. So look, I want to get to the panel, the first panel. So I'm just going to call the names. Hopefully folks will come on out here. On stage, for me to moderate and interview and talk to, we're going to hear from Jessica Jackson, who is my co-founder, one of my co-founders on Cut 50. We're going to hear from Pamela Wynn, who I was talking about, who's been leading this fight for dignity for incarcerated women. Also, Lonnie Jones, just literally the past couple of months home out of federal prison. And the good brother Louis L. Reed, who's the driving force behind the Empathy Network and so many things. Give a round of applause to the panelists as they make their way to the stage. Oh, good to see everybody. It got dark. Oh, okay, so they're important, so they get okay, I see how this works. I guess I agree, though. Let's start with you, Pamela Wynn. Just say a little bit of something about your story. You have a tough story, and I don't know how much you want to get into it, but I do think it's important for people to know how this issue touches each one of you personally before we talk about the policies and the politics and all the stuff that we're doing.
Sure. First of all, thank you all for being here this evening. I really appreciate your support. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. I come from the typical Southern family, low income, uneducated. I was the first to graduate from high school, college, and have my own business. I thought I was doing things well, but made some bad business decisions because I was not aware of how to run a business, nor did I have any support or guidance on that thing. And it cost me a 78-month sentence in federal prison. During that time, I was pregnant when I was incarcerated. I was shackled whenever I was transported, and on one of those days, I fell due to the shackles cutting into my ankles. And when I fell, there was no medical care. There was not even the question of, are you okay? I was just placed back on the van and taken on to court. A few days later, I started to have bleeding and issues and problems. I sent tons of medical requests that were ignored for a couple of weeks. And finally, when they did finally answer me, they told me that there was nothing there for me. They could do nothing for me. It was a men's prison. They didn't expect to have women. They definitely didn't expect to have a pregnant woman. So there was no care for me. They could not take me out to be seen without approval from the U.S. Marshals. To send a request and get approval back was a turnaround time of 4 weeks. So when we finally got that back, it had been about 8 weeks later. And I got to the ER. I was turned around, of course, because it was not an emergency. And then I was taken back. We had to put in another request for me to see an obstetrician. We're talking another 4 weeks. This time, they needed an ultrasound, which they didn't have that machine in their office. So I was sent back again, another 4 weeks. During all this time, I ended up miscarrying my baby and never received any medical care. And then when I came home, I was told there was nothing I could do about what had happened to me, and that began my fight.
Well, I appreciate your courage. I think people don't know whether to clap or cry. We will come back, though, and you'll learn how you can help her in the fight to get more dignity for incarcerated women. Lonnie, there's been a lot of talk about the First Step Act and, was it good, is it bad, a lot of politics around it. I think it's hard to look in your face and say the First Step Act was a bad idea. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Well,
You gotta let that mic up.
well, first of all, I'd like to thank y'all for being here. I'd like to thank you for having me here, man, in the Cut 50. I come from Bridgeport, Connecticut, a small little city, in a two-parent loving home with 2 brothers. I grew up as a good student, played basketball with me and my brothers, and went off to college, did 2 years of college and came back, started working, and eventually I got involved in the drug business, or so, quote unquote. And eventually after that, I got sentenced as a first-time nonviolent offender to a life sentence in prison. First time ever being arrested for anything and charged with anything, I was given a life sentence by the federal government. Through the years of incarceration, you know, we fight for our freedom and try to get out, and it kept being denied. Me, my brothers, and my uncles, and a few others, that we was all on the same case. And to sit there and think about the possibility of me never being able to come and see my family again, or be able to have my freedom again, just didn't sit right. It was painful to me, to my family, to my children, that daddy had a life sentence, or my mom seeing that her son had a life sentence. It was painful. But the fight continued to go. We all fought, we prayed, my family, myself, and I sit here today before you as a man that had a life sentence at one time, did 20 years in prison for the first time ever for my first time ever being charged with anything. But now I'm here addressing you today, and I'm truly grateful.
Lewis Reed, when we fight, we win. I wonder if you'd be willing to share some of your story. I saw you smiling real big. Why were you smiling so big? Hearing the brother.
Well, I'm smiling so big for one of two reasons. Number one, I know Lonnie personally, and Lonnie's plight was something by which, when we were advocating for the First Step Act, and I know that we'll get into this momentarily, but when we were advocating for the First Step Act, I brought Lonnie vicariously, both him, his brother, and the individuals by whom were sentenced to a life sentence as well, his co-defendants. I brought them into the room with us. I brought them into the offices of the Senate. I brought them into the offices of the U.S. Congress. And so the reason why I fought on their behalf was because, like Lonnie, I have a federal registration number, 139591014. And, you know, as I was reflecting earlier today about where my journey began, my journey didn't begin, Van, in 2000 when I was indicted by the United States government. My journey began when I was vicariously exposed to the criminal justice system when I was 5 years old. That's when both of my parents were indicted by the United States federal government, and I was raised by my maternal grandmother. So I was sentenced to a term of 188 months in federal prison, which is approximately 16 years. I served approximately 14 years off that sentence. And while I was incarcerated, there was one of several things that happened with me. First, I had a spiritual transformation. Second, I realized that education was going to be a key that was going to unlock opportunity for me. And the third thing is that, you know, I realized that those who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. And so I wanted to be able to impact change, and I wanted to be able to contribute change once I was released.
Well, yeah. I got a chance to watch you in action, walking those halls of Congress trying to get the bill done. And it is, you know, when you say people closest to the problem, close to the solution, it was the formerly incarcerated folks, when the politics got too heavy and people said, oh, it's too controversial, whatever, it's the formerly incarcerated folks who said, no, we're not leaving, y'all keep arguing. Y'all keep fighting. We got to get this bill done. So I appreciate you. Jessica, you are you know, one of the co-founders of Cut 50, helped to lead the charge on the First Step Act. This is personal for you as well.
Yeah, first I want to thank all the students who are here tonight. I know around the corner they've got like a mechanical, rideable pumpkin and funnel cake, and I really think you guys made the better choice being here. But yeah, this is personal to me as well. Now, I have not lived behind bars as the others before me on this panel, but I was also impacted by the justice system. And as it turns out, before I became a mayor of a town, before I co-founded Cut 50, before I became a lawyer, I was a scared 22-year-old girl standing in a courtroom in Georgia with nothing but my GED and a 2-month-old baby, watching my husband go to prison for 15, serve 6. And I remember leaving that courtroom and just being devastated and going and sitting in the bathroom in this courthouse, dirty bathroom floor, to nurse my baby and just crying and crying all over her. I didn't know what I was gonna do. I knew we were gonna lose the house, which we did. I knew I was gonna end up having to go on food stamps and Medicaid, which I did. And I knew I was gonna have to find a way to power through that and be somebody and be a role model for my daughter. And I also knew that I wanted to fight back. I knew that I wanted to make sure that no other family went through what I was going through and what my husband was going through and what my daughter would go through for the next few years of her life, not having a dad around. So for me, this is personal too.
Yeah. Well, so, what I was saying before, this is not it's becoming a more popular cause, but it didn't start off that way. And when you fight for stuff you really believe in, you meet just incredible people. And these just are incredible people. Jessica, I just want you to talk a little bit about the First Step Act. Just highlight what the bill did, why it was important, and then we want to have a little bit of a conversation about that among those of us here. What was the First Step Act, and why was, even though it was just a first step, why was it so important?
Yeah, so the First Step Act was a federal prison and sentencing reform bill. Like you said, it was the first step. It certainly wasn't the last step. There was a reason we worked hard to come up with that name. What it did is it enacted several key sentencing reforms to make sure we're reducing how long we're sending people to prison in 4 different categories. And it also aimed to make our prisons places of rehabilitation, places that would get people job ready when they came home. But I think that the most impressive piece for me of First Step Act is that it was a piece of legislation that was supported by both Republicans and Democrats and signed into law by Donald Trump, somebody who was the last person I ever would have thought would be good on this issue. And I also was really impressed in terms of what's in the bill. All of the things you heard here tonight, as I'm looking at your faces, Pam was instrumental in getting provisions in there to keep women from being shackled while they were pregnant and in labor. Lonnie's story, we talked about the people who had been given life for drugs and why we had to bring them home. Lewis brought around to these offices his actual prison ID and talked about what it was like to have to sneak his prison ID out of the facility with him, knowing that could be a reason he would be sent back there if he got caught, just because people were coming home with no way of proving their identity. So as powerful a piece of legislation as it was, I think the most powerful thing was that it really, really reflected the voices and stories of the people who had been impacted.
Yeah. You played such a big role in the passage of the First Step Act, especially making sure the dignity provisions were there. Talk a little bit about that experience. I mean, what's it like to basically go from, the jailhouse to the state house, trying to make change at the federal level? And then I'm going to come back and ask you about the fight in Georgia and everything else. But talk about that First Step Act. And it was tough because people thought it was controversial to work on any issue that Donald Trump might be involved with, if you're African American, if you're progressive, if you're a Democrat. So talk a little bit about why you thought it was important to stick in the fight anyway.
So as I said earlier, I was told when I got home there was nothing that I could do. So the first thing that I did do was start a petition through change.org. And when I started that petition, I found out that there were over 128,000 people out there that supported me and agreed with me.
Wow.
And from that point, when it got to be about 100,000 signatures, Senator Cory Booker came on the petition and made a comment and then asked to meet me. I was taken to Washington, D.C. I met him there for a round table where he, Kamala Harris, and Elizabeth Warren were sponsoring a bill called the Dignity Act for incarcerated women. And that's also where I met Jessica. And we talked about this bill, but unfortunately, it died. Nothing happened. Well, I could have stopped there, but I was like, no, not giving up. I partnered up with Jessica and Cut 50, and we kept pursuing things and seeing what avenues we could take. Then I think Representative Karen Bass, they had another bill that came out called the Pregnant Women in Custody Act, and it got a little more spark, but it also fizzled out. But I still wasn't giving up. We still didn't give up. And then I remember when I got the call from Jessica asking me, well, we're working on this First Step Act. What do you think about using your language in the bill to stop shackling of women? And I was like, yes, of course, let's do it, because it needed to be done. And so from there, it was like a movie for me. I got invited to the White House by Jared Kushner. And when I got that invitation, of course, I was looking at it like, I don't know, do I want to do this? I took a while to decide about it. I debated about it, but then I thought about it. And one of the things is that we all talk about as directly impacted people is having a seat at the table, being able to have our voices heard. And what I said to myself is, if I don't go, then I don't get my voice heard. If I do go, I know all the things that we hear about this guy. I don't know what's true and what's not true. But if I go and I sit there and I talk to these people face to face, then I can say for myself personally what they will and what they will not do. So I accepted the invitation. And then I got invited a second time. And it was positive for me. The first visit, I was able to speak to Governor Felon, who was the governor of Oklahoma at the time. And when I spoke to her and I told her about my story, she promised me if that bill ever came across her desk, that she would sign it. And that bill did come across her desk, and it was signed in Oklahoma. So the law was passed at the shackle. And then from there, like Van said, it was very controversial. I was getting all kind of backlash about not only just going to the White House, but supporting the bill. But my thoughts about it was, when I was incarcerated, I sat in that cell alone. My baby died for this. So whatever decisions that I made them based on my own personal experience, not about what someone else felt or not what they experienced. I had to do what I thought was best for me, and that was sticking with this bill. I liked it because, like Jessica said, it had something for everybody in it. I remember being incarcerated in federal prison in 2010 when they had the crack amendment passed or whatever, but something about the ratio with crack cocaine. My crime was white collar. Although I was happy for the people that it did affect, I was also sad because I was like, well, what about me? You know, there were so many people that didn't get anything. Well, this bill had something in it for everybody. And so that was another reason that I strongly stood behind it. And then when they did the final vote on it, Van and Jessica brought me to DC for the final vote to be present. And we're sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, this is what they do up here. This is really boring. And so I was busy chit-chatting, you know, and so as I'm chit-chatting, I hear the word shackle. I hear the word file. And somebody said to me, are they talking about you, Pamela? And I'm thinking to myself, no, they couldn't be talking about me. I don't know nobody down there. And so we got quiet and we started listening, and they were talking about me. Representative Karen Bass was literally telling my story as if she had sat down with me and I had told it to her personally. And to hear her speak and know about me and know what happened to me and speak about it on the floor and tell them this is why we need to pass this bill was like beyond a dream come true. When you're incarcerated, you're in there, you're alone, you're by yourself, and like I said, losing my child, then being placed in solitary confinement. So to hear her words and then to watch that board and watched them voting, and I'm thinking, okay, we just need the majority. Van said, no, we need 2/3. I'm like, well, what is that? He's like, 290 votes. And then I'm like, oh no. And so then you have 15 minutes. And so I'm looking at the time, I'm looking at the votes. And so about 15 minutes, I think it was like at 270 something. And so I'm looking at Van and I'm about to be in tears, and he's like, hold on, watch the speaker, it's not over yet. When the speaker stands up, then you know it's over. And so he's still sitting, the numbers are still going, and then when it got to 290, I'm like, can I scream? If I scream, will they take me to jail? And he's like, no, you have a bunch of attorneys here with you. If anything happens, we'll get you out. But that had to be like the greatest moment for me. All the naysayers, it like put them to rest. It made me feel like every decision I made it for the good reason and the right reason. And for those women that I left behind, I was so happy to be able to give them something, to know that nobody else will have to experience what I did.
Lonnie, you were watching all this unfold behind bars. Take us into that situation where there are people who, as much as she was holding her breath and biting her nails, at least she was out. You had people inside holding their breath and biting their nails. Talk about what it was like to be behind bars while this was being debated as a political football. Your life is being debated as a political football.
Well, when it was passed, in prison, you have people that's pessimistic, ain't nothing gonna happen. Then you got people that's always optimistic, everything's gonna happen.
Right.
That's just what you have in prison, And so when they was talking about the bill, we used to have these debates about what it's gonna do, what it's not gonna do. But when it actually went up for vote and it got passed, most of the people that I know, they was happy, they was excited it was gonna affect them. But me personally, I didn't think it affected me. I was like, man, I've been getting denied so many times. I said, man, I ain't even thinking about the First Step Back. This is how I thought. But Lewis, he contacted my family and was like, he know this bill applies to him. I said, man, this bill don't apply to me. So I've been hearing that, I've been lying to my daughters, man, for 20 years, man. They ain't trying to hear that. But then I had got a letter from the Federal Defender's Office saying, like, you might be eligible. I ripped it up. God honest truth, I ripped it up. I said, man, this don't apply to me, man. And then the lawyer, she contacted me, called up there, and started explaining to me how it does affect me. And she told me straight up, I'm gonna get you out.
Wow.
She started, you know what I'm saying? Then I got contact with Lewis, and he was like, man, I told you. It applies to you, man.
I sure did.
He said, I told you, man. That's how he takes it. I told you it applied to you. So when I heard that, then I still had this resistance, like, the judge still got the discretion. Before the other laws came in, they still denied me. So I still was hesitant, I didn't want to tell my family anything about this because I knew that.
You didn't want to get their hopes up.
Yeah, my mother and father, they've been through this for 20 years with me and my brother. So I didn't want to give them a high. I didn't want to give my daughters a high and then they get let down again. This was too much. So when I ended up getting a court date and all that, and I contacted Lewis and we talked and all that. And the joy that I started to feel then, once I got the date, that's when the joy started to come in. Man, this is real. I might actually be getting ready to get up out of here. And I started doing the calculations with the guidelines now, like, yeah, if I get this, they gotta let me go soon I get out. And praise be to God that, man, the judge seen fit that, the time was way excessive for somebody a first-time nonviolent offender, that these laws that were passed to destroy the minority community, it was time to change. Yeah. And this is what the First Step Back. And now I started to understand what the people in prison were saying, why they were so jubilant when this act was passed.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to Lewis in 1 second, but when you get out, it's still not easy. And so as we're thinking about second step back and third step back and last step back, what are some of the things that people coming home might benefit from for the next round of legislation, or people who are still stuck in there?
Right. For me, like, and it's a blessing that I had a lot of family support. After 20 years, I still have most of my family still around. But also, you know, the challenging of you coming home to new technology, new clothes, everything looked crazy to me, strange. You know what, I was wearing FUBU back then, so everything was big. You know, now, you know, they got me, you know, looking a little tight right now, but, you know, but,
Not complaining.
yeah, but I ended up transitioning to North Carolina where they have a lot of reentry programs. And my aunt, you know what I'm saying, who's real involved in donating money and getting people to donate money to these nonprofit organizations for reentry. And this is what helped me. There's a program called Step Up in Durham, North Carolina that I attended that helped you get jobs, teach you how to do resumes. So I think we need a lot of that more, like reentry programs that's gonna help people getting out of prison.
Well, you know, honestly, when you have a country that has incarcerated this many people, you know, when you're talking about 2+ million people locked up in jails and prisons, that's not even counting the immigration detention centers, just 2.3 million people locked up in jails and prisons, and another 4.5 million caught up on probation and parole. That is the biggest peacetime prison population in the history of the world times 2. You got to go back to Nazi Germany to find that many people locked up anywhere in the world. And so as we begin to turn this corner and bringing people home, the whole society has to step up and begin to bring people home the right way. Louis, I'll give you the last question, which is just very briefly, since I think we're at time. People hearing this and seeing this probably want to get involved. They probably want to know, what can I do? This is maybe the biggest moral issue of our time, certainly one of them, the mass incarceration of human beings, denying freedom and dignity to so many people. How can people get involved?
Yeah, so at Cut 50, we have something that's called the Empathy Network. The Empathy Network is the largest bipartisan coalition of impacted organizers and advocates in the world. And so we help the people who need the help. So what you can do, you know, to be able to be involved in issues like this is that everyone in here has a smartphone. They can simply text the word justice to 97483. You can text the word justice to 97483.
97483?
97483.
974.
974.
83.
83. You can text the word justice to 97483. That will loop you into the largest bipartisan coalition of impacted advocates, organizers, people who are on college campuses, people who are in every facet of society that you can think about. We have them. We have doctors, we have nurses, we have scholars, we have every single person that you can think of involved in Empathy Network, and we want to make sure that coalition continues to grow so that we can continue to do the work.
That's great. Well, listen, please give a round of applause to this incredible panel. Even this time last year, people were still saying the First Step Back would never pass. If it passed, it wouldn't make a difference. 7,000 people have come home. There's 7,000 people just like this who have come home. Some came home a little bit early. Some would have never come home. And if you do the math, if you add up all the time that was restored, how many years were taken off of his sentence, her sentence, I think everybody here would agree that 2,000 years is a long time, right? Jesus died 2,000 years ago. Will we agree 2,000 years is a long time? It's 155,000 years of human freedom that's been restored by the First Step Back, just so far. So I'm gonna come back out and talk about it more later on, but what I wanna do as we dismiss the panel, I wanna bring to the stage a Mother Jones reporter. Her name is Natalie Baptiste. She's an amazing young journalist. She covers my favorite stuff, climate change and human rights. I'm a green jobs, not jails guy, so she's all over all that stuff. And she's gonna come out, she's gonna introduce a poet from the Free Minds Book Club and Writing Workshop. Give a round of applause to this panel and welcome Natalie Baptiste.
Hey everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. As Van said, my name is Natalie Baptiste, and I'm a reporter at Mother Jones at the DC Bureau, not too far from here. Before we get started with our next conversation, we're going to hear from Nokomis Hunter. Nokomis spent a decade in prison, and now he's a poet ambassador at the Free Minds Book Club. He uses his story and his poetry to go around to different communities and talking to youth and helping prevent violence in some of the communities that are most impacted by mass incarceration. So without further ado, let's hear from Nokomis.
Good evening, everyone. First, before I read my poem, I want to introduce myself. As Nelly said, I'm a poet ambassador from Free Minds Book Club. How I got into Free Minds Book Club, I was 16 years old, facing 132 months at DC jail. This was back in 2007, and at DC jail, Free Minds Book Club encouraged me to read and write. So I did end up doing 10 years from the 132 month sentencing. And not to get too deep into me being in the system, I am a born and raised Washingtonian. I've been in the system majority of my life, so I'm glad to be here to basically express what a lot of other guys that's incarcerated feeling today. So this poem that I'm about to introduce is called Failure to Help. And I've written this poem because, I felt a lot of pain inside, because when you in prison, it's just not the sentences that everybody had to go through. You also have to face the health care, the lack of hospitality that is treated towards us. And I feel this poem expressed a lot of that. Their cries for help sound as if a man was set afire. But their flesh is just as cool as the wind of desire. Is it not loud enough to grab the nation's attention? Or is it only loud enough to give him medication? As their minds sing rehabilitation, the gods laugh without hesitation. Not giving deep thoughts about their mental pain and their state of condition seems to be the gods' ways of not weakening their cold intuition. See, times behind walls and laws of hope alone can cause a person to vote themselves from this earth, because the treatment given to them isn't making them feel rebirth, instead just worth. Why can't there be a recall on the broken souls that are locked away and restrained? They'd rather keep them locked away than give them back again. I guess that's just something they'd rather not explain. Can't they see that with a prisoner go through, it is hard to sustain? That their hardship alone can cause them to go insane. But whether or not I complain, my faith still remains the same, that one day their free minds will be attained. And that's it. And yeah, so I wrote that poem from my heart, and when I read that, it do take me back to the time when I was behind them cells, when I was behind the bar. And the guys go through a lot. And just imagine that you just wake up every day to a four-corner room, and that's your home for the rest of your life. And it ain't just about, God just treating you in any kinds of ways, but it's about how we able to get back to our original self when we get home, because sometimes a lot of guys come home still in a prison state of mind. So that's a census within the census itself. So, I just want to leave y'all with that, and y'all just think about that and think about how we can improve the criminal justice system. Thank y'all for having me here.
Yeah, whichever one. Someone has to sit next to me. Thank you all for joining us again tonight. See, y'all have some fans in the crowd.
Yo, you got a lavalier mic? They didn't give us one of those.
I'm one of the special ones. We're off to a great start. So tonight, as you can see, I'm joined by just a few of the incredible folks who operate in this world. And to get started, I would just love for each of you to just give the audience one line about yourself, just to help them get to know you a little bit more. We'll start with you, Dwayne.
I'm a poet, and I grew up in Suitland.
I'm an advocate, and I fight for justice.
I build the technologies that help keep families connected to their incarcerated loved ones, and my daughter and my son are somewhere in here tonight.
I feel obligated to say that, like, my godmother is also in the audience. My godson is in the audience. You know.
Who is my wife? I mean, my wife is, my mother is also in the audience, who is his godmother. And my wife is in the audience too. So I love you too, babe, wherever you are.
Now we know where all the cheering's coming from. So to start with, and we can just go down the row, tell us a little bit about your journey from, being an incarcerated person now to, doing cool events like this, being on stage and educating people about our criminal justice system.
I'm not sure if it's appropriate or correct to say that the story starts with being an incarcerated person. I think the story probably starts with, again, I've never praised my elementary school for anything before, but they had a set of encyclopedias that hooked me to reading about basketball, and that hooked me to reading more generally. And though my school didn't offer me a lot, and though I criticized it a lot, I think it fostered a love of learning. And part of what later on, being a student at Walker Mill Middle School and then a student at Suitland High School, part of what I think I didn't get, and part of what frustrated me, part of what I reflected on when I ended up in prison, I was able to sort of loop back and think about what I did get from those places to encourage me to push forward, which was primarily like a love of reading. And to talk about the criminal justice system now, it's just a recognition that I'm free, but I know a lot of people who aren't free. And I've been able to accomplish things that a lot of folks I know may be able to accomplish, but they're not free. And so being able to be in an audience, I can't even see y'all. So the truth is, I could be talking to one person or like 7,000 people, but having an audience of anybody who cares about what it means to want people to not be incarcerated is significant, largely because I know that I'm not really talking, they raised up the light so that I can see y'all. But even being here to talk about it is to say that, like, I could tell my folks that what I do matters because it's people in the audience who want them to be free, as opposed to just being against some theoretical thing that they call mass incarceration.
If I can add anything to what you just beautifully said, I think for me it's unfair to talk about where I'm at without talking about where I was. And when you think about where a lot of us here were in the prison system, you think about being confined in concrete walls full of people who have lost hope, filled with anger, some believing that they'd never go home again. And there are some of the most inhumane processes that people go through. One of them is when people are forced to strip naked day in and day out, bending over just to squat and cough and showing your most private parts to complete strangers every single day. And what that does is it damages the ability to socialize with people upon reentry because of so many traumas that is built upon that. However, with that, we tend to see that there are ways that we can change the system to bring more opportunities, to bring more dignity to the people who are there, who eventually are going to come home into a healthy way. And so looking at that, and when bills do change to provide better circumstances, like for most of us, you have a renewed hope when you come home. For me, policy saved my life. If it wasn't for a bill that had changed, I would not be out here today. And so it's been with that passion that I come out here now with my brothers and sisters to continue to fight against this system, because there are still so many people left behind that deserve to be out here and deserve that opportunity. And so you see 3 clear examples of when a bill does pass in the right way, people can come to be successful. And so I always like to remember there's still so many people that we have left behind who are still dealing with these inhumane processes that we still need to fight for.
Oh, are we going to go down the line?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, you know, giving background, I love giving background. I'm grateful for Dwayne and both Michael for giving a little bit of background. When you meet me or hear me talk in these kinds of circles, and I love these kinds of environments, is because you'll typically hear me talk about family and the need for family. And I'll even shout out my own family and talk about the importance and value of family in my life and even in the lives of the families that we support and the work that we do. I'm always excited about that because when I begin to talk about family and the family dynamic and how they're also impacted from incarceration, and not just me, because I promise you, when I was in those cells, I thought that it was just me that was in those cells. And I didn't realize it was my mom who would be going through lonely nights of having her only son in prison and wondering what her 15 and 16 and 17-year-old son is doing with other men around other men that are serving life sentences in some of the worst prisons in the state of Virginia. Like, learning that was a big piece of it was new for me. And transitioning over to the justice reform spaces, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, I'm sure, in the next few minutes, but also trying to figure out how to change the narrative around what people look like when they're coming home from prison and the careers that they want to penetrate. And so I try to figure out ways to be able to merge my family and the family dynamic and the importance of empathy and family, especially when people are going through incarceration, all the way through now in building the technologies and trying to figure out ways to go into tech spaces and entrepreneurial spaces and even rooms like this where we can begin to change the dinner conversation and show that, hey, look, there are, again, the 3 clear examples of what life can look like with that right support coming from the community. But I enjoy these kinds of conversations just for those 2 reasons alone.
This is a great segue because I definitely want to talk about, what it's like inside prison for incarcerated people. And, if we're going to incarcerate people as a society, what should those prisons look like? And how important is it to have them actually be more of a rehab or corrective as opposed to just a place where you're punished and then when you leave, you're on your own? Don't all jump in at once to answer.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's kind of funny. Like, I talk to people nowadays, and I meet them, and it's 2 interesting things that always happen, maybe 3. They ask me who I am, and I tell them I'm a poet, and they automatically conclude that I'm a beggar, because nobody buys poetry. And you were supposed to laugh, except you knew that you also don't buy poetry. Go to Amazon.com right now. By Felon by Reginald Dwayne Betts. It was reviewed favorably twice in the New York Times, But anyway, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that I tell them I've been to prison. And they're like, oh, you one of those guys. I kind of expected that because you black and you're a man and, yeah, you from Suitland. And then I might mess around and tell them I went to law school. I was like, I'm a lawyer. And then they say, what law school did you go to? And I say, I went to Yale Law School. And they figure they could Google me if I went to Yale Law School, so I must not be brash enough to lie about something like that. So then they reevaluate everything that they had just considered, poet, unemployed, convict, unemployed, Yale lawyer. Oh, damn, he's married. And you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with prison conditions? Well, you think that if you asked me about prison conditions, I would talk about the fact that I was 5'5" and 125 pounds when I went to prison. And you think that I would talk about the fact that I was sent to the first super maximum security prison in the state of Virginia. But I've come to think that we recognize prison conditions are far more harsh and punitive and violent than they need to be. And every conversation around prison conditions does not end up being a conversation around a way in which the state engenders a kind of violence and a kind of punitiveness and a kind of circumstance that leads to even more violence in these institutions of confinement. And instead of being that conversation, the conversation goes towards what men do when they are treated this way, what men do when they are sentenced to 30, 40, 50, 60 years, when they aren't given fresh vegetables to eat, when they aren't given like ability to just have the sun shine on their bodies. And so I'm at the point now where, like, if you want to talk about prison and the conditions of confinement, I want to talk about the circumstances that you all, the state, the citizens of this country, allow men, women, and largely children, because when Marcus went to prison, he was 15. And they called him a grown-ass man, and he was 15. I went to prison, I was 16. And they sent us there because they expected that to be okay, because nobody in this audience, nobody in this country would say that this is not how we treat children. And so I'm not willing to talk about the other men who I was incarcerated with, because those men were forced in the same kind of conditions that I was forced in. So I don't know, when I think about the prison conditions, I think about that as a space that like nurtured, not those conditions, but those men that I did my bid with, that nurtured a Yale-trained lawyer. And I'm nice with it, you know.
Nice.
Very nice. Very nice. So, you know, somebody that I deeply admired once told me that punishment is not justice. And our current system does not deliver justice. When you look at kids who are being given life without parole and being incarcerated with people who never believe they're going to go home, they're not receiving age-appropriate services. All they're concerned about is how to survive each and every single day, how to protect themselves left and right, and figuring out how to deal with the racism, just all of the nuances within the side of those confined areas. And so if we can look at how we can provide age-appropriate services for kids who maybe even entered into the incarceration system traumatized, helping them figure out and learn how to deal with their traumas in an emotional, healthy way is what we need to get to. And right now, we just don't have that. And so we're getting closer by changing laws. Like, less than half the country has abolished life without parole for kids. We still have 28 states to go. And so as we move forward, we need to remember that kids need age-appropriate services because of their ability to still grow and mature. And with that is where we need to continue this conversation moving forward.
That's great, because I wanted to talk about sentencing maximums. An idea that's getting kind of popular among criminal justice reform, not necessarily politicians, is the idea that 20 years should be the maximum sentence for anyone, regardless of the crime. And, you know, right now it's really easy to be like, 10 years for smoking weed, that's so silly. But, you know, if you talk about another crime, a robbery or an assault, they're like, yeah, you know, throw them in prison, bury them under the prison, basically, speaking of sentences that are really long. So how do we move the conversation forward to getting people to realize that it's completely unnecessary to, you know, take a 16-year-old and give him 40 years? That doesn't serve justice, and it's not a fair punishment. How do we change everything tonight?
So I'm not a policy guy, so I don't have any advice on that. What I will do is I like to storytell, and I like to talk about the real people behind the stories that we talk about in some of the research papers that are being submitted that end up in legislation, that end up in bills, and that impact policy. And just a quick spoiler alert, So Dwayne and I were co-defendants when we went to prison at 15 and 16 years old. When we made that decision to carjack someone as young teenagers, and the state of Virginia decided to certify us both as adults, we were up against a life sentence. And in fact, my lawyer came and told me that I was probably going to serve a life sentence because I didn't answer the questions right in the interrogation room. Later on, just a few months later, once they certified me as an adult and they moved me over to Fairfax County Jail, Dwayne was waiting to be transferred over to the jail. So Dwayne came over about a month later. It's about a month when you came over to Fairfax Jail. And they moved me out of one housing unit and put me in solitary confinement. And I sat in solitary confinement because they didn't want Dwayne and I in the same pod together.
Oh, shit, they did that? Yo, they put me in a hole for 10 days before they put me into the housing unit.
Bro, I was on the unit thinking like, oh yeah, my boy about to come to the unit. I knew you were coming. And so I was psyched. I'm like, yo, word, we about to go through this together. You know what I mean?
So they was like, yo, I'm gonna give Dwayne 10 days in the hole, and then I'm gonna put him in a unit, and then I'm gonna send Marcus to the hole for 10 days.
But they kept me in the hole for a minute until you end up going to court, and they move you into, because you on a juvenile pod, and they move you into another block, and then they brought me out of the hole and put me back in the juvenile pod because they wanted to strategically keep that.
I think they shut the juvenile pod down when they took you out of the hole. I think they was like, look, we got 2 of them, fuck it. No more juvenile unit. And they just put both of us in GP.
In the GP, you are right. That's exactly how it went down. And then that issue with the cookie went down, I got in that fight. That was a whole nother issue.
Those cookies are good, though. I will say that.
So what, you get a cookie once every blue moon. So what ends up, the reason why I tell that story for context is to talk, as we think about like what sentences look like for young people, especially young people that are going in these prison cells. First of all, I want to just annihilate the conversation centered around nonviolent versus violent offenders because you talked about those 10 years for that weed smoking. Like, we were weed smoking teenagers like 15 minutes before the carjacking. Same teenagers. If we would have got caught 15 minutes earlier, we would have got, we would have been eligible for a ton of things that people just aren't eligible for because we got caught 15 minutes later and it was considered a violent crime. So that's one thing that I want to kind of sort of put a stamp in that really quickly. But the other thing that I think is very, very important, and you're talking about like sentences and sentencing reform, is like thinking about like what that, again, not what that just did for me. Like, I remember sitting in court and when they sentenced us to 23 to life. And then they suspended 15 of my years and they suspended 14 of your years. And I remember sitting there in the defense chair, and I know how to count 15 minus 23, but like I'm like trying to carry the 1 in court, and my brain can't even wrap around what was happening to me at that time. And so you think about the magnitude of the decision the magnitude of that decision that the judge was making at that moment and how it impacted not just my life, but all of the people around me and my family's lives. And I think that when we begin to learn that this just isn't just a person that we're sentencing in their lives that we're stealing away and throwing them in these cages, it's an entire community that goes in the cages along with them. And again, going back to that family and empathy thing is very, very important to me because I think that that's how we begin to change what it looks like. Because the reality of it is the people that's writing those bills, they ain't never met a Marcus or a Dwayne. And if we do that, if we do our jobs correctly, maybe they will, and maybe we begin to see that impacted on Capitol Hill.
And then I'll just say very briefly, like judges and prosecutors have a whole wide range of discretion. But when you have unlimitless discretion, you have no discretion. And so we faced 15-year minimum sentence, which could have been suspended completely, and we faced life as a maximum. What does that mean? You a judge and you staring at a 16-year-old who's committed a carjacking and no one has physically gotten hurt. People have gotten emotionally traumatized. People might need therapy for years. But what does it mean to say that this kid is facing 15 to death, right? It is absolutely meaningless. And so I actually think that, and of course this is a state issue, but I think that when states begin to say, how can we rehabilitate our laws? Stop trying to rehabilitate me. I wasn't rehabilitated by prison. I just got older, right? We need to really rehabilitate our laws so that when judges are applying discretion, that discretion is somehow meaningful. Because when it's cabined by nothing, The judge wasn't saying that 9 years was sufficient. He was just saying 9 years seems blasé. He told me, I'm under no illusion that sending you to prison will help. And then he sentenced me to 9 years in prison. And I tell you one thing, there was not a single person in that courtroom. I mean, one, my family had never heard of Yale. What the fuck is Yale? Like, for real. Yale and Suitland are not synonyms, and the word Yale does not come up in PG County public schools quite often, or at all, right? So when a judge sentenced me to 9 years in prison, nobody in that courtroom was thinking theoretically about college or specifically about Yale. But what does that say about our system? Because quiet as kept, I decided to go to law school on the humble. I decided to go to Harvard the same way motherfuckers make decisions to buy a new pair of Jordans. And I went there. But the real, and it's not to brag, but it's to say that when a judge sentenced me to life in prison, he had no belief that this was possible. And if he didn't have life as the counterpoint, if he only had 20 years or 25 years, then he might have been forced to like actually look at me and Marcus as individuals and decide what might be a meaningful sentence if a actual sentence was what was demanded.
I do want to talk about prosecutors, actually. There's a slow wave of so-called progressive prosecutors who are coming in, and I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on how much of a role that's going to play, in the future of criminal justice reform.
I hire prosecutors. I legit hire prosecutors with a team of 6 other people as a part of the Criminal Justice Commission. And so I think I have some real world, practical, absurd experience. But I'm gonna let you.
Oh, you want me to talk about prosecutors? We are seeing a movement of progressive prosecutors. Weird to say that in a way. So when we see progressive prosecutors trying to come into this space, it's really kind of difficult to navigate when there's a history of no such thing as a progressive prosecutor. There's just a whole lot that we still have to do there in gaining trust to ensure that the right person is there not to punish somebody, but to help find ways through the community to provide alternative answers instead of incarceration. So if we can look at that and find the right people who will focus on community solutions rather than incarceration, then I would say we can find the right person for those jobs. And I still believe that we have a lot of work to do even there.
We could sit here and do this all night, and I kind of want to, but I guess we should start wrapping up. So I'm going to ask a quick yes or no question, and we can go down the line. Should we abolish prisons?
I'm going to let them two answer that. I'm going to just say real quick. On the prosecutor piece, I'm going to talk for 10 seconds. I would say that I hire prosecutors in Connecticut is one of the few states in which they hire prosecutors. The governor appoints members of a criminal justice commission. I'm one of the people that got appointed. We hire all of the prosecutors in Connecticut. And I will say that prosecutors tend to be frequently just like everybody else in this audience. They want safety. They want to prevent crime. They want to do what's right. But the problem is that we don't have a real presence in a courtroom, and we don't have a real presence of the community in the criminal justice system. And I think that it's not right to just put all of the burden on prosecutors when I got sentenced, nobody from my community was there. And I'm not saying that it's their fault, but I'm saying that we should seriously think about what our role is in all of this. We elect the legislators that make life possible. We frequently elect the judges or the politicians that appoint the judges that make those kinds of decisions. So prosecutors, I don't want them to be a scapegoat for our failures. And prison abolished, set my people free. Unless they committed rape, because I hate people who committed rape, and that's probably not appropriate to say, but I'm trying to deal with some things.
We don't just need to look at prisons. We need to look at the entire system. And we're talking about from the court processing system to pretrial to the back end of reentry. We need to look at everything in its totality, because even if we look at it structurally, yes, we need to change that. The process, yes, we need to change that. So I would just say we need to look at the entire system and look at the needs of these people that are entering into the system and address it in that light.
Yes.
All right. Thank you guys so much. I
feel like you got like a few more questions left.
Don't worry, this is just the announcement. I'll email you the rest. So I just have a quick announcement. So ushers will be walking around, passing out note cards for any questions y'all might have. And then in about 10 minutes, they'll come back around to collect them. And so next, I would like to welcome Van Jones back to the stage with my boss, the Mother Jones DC Bureau Chief, David Korn. All right.
Beautiful. Well done. Well done. Very impressive. My brother. Beautiful. That's good. Hey. Appreciate it. Bula. I'm yellow too.
Yeah, I know. Are you sticking around?
Yeah, I'm around. Hey.
Good evening, everyone. I'm David Korn. You've seen this man already tonight, Van Jones. We're going to be talking for a little bit, and I want to start off by saying that I am honored to share the stage with Van, but even more importantly, with Dwayne, Marcus, Michael, and all the others who've been up here tonight. It's just incredibly inspiring. And I am not at all upset that I'm missing the World Series for this. I think this is good for the soul and good for the spirit. And I also give Van and Cut 50 my heartfelt congratulations on being able to show that progress is possible, that we can help our fellow humans, even in a time of division, and a time where, quite frankly, a lot of people wonder about the whole notion of progress on the social front. So congratulations on what you've achieved, but also on the example that you've set, because we need progress, obviously, in this field, but also on climate change, political reform, money in politics, and so many other things. And so it's good to have good news these days. So thank you for doing that. Now, what's been intriguing to me, watching from afar, is that you've been able to achieve this progress within this particular political environment, which on a good day is toxic.
True.
Right? And you've done it in a bipartisan fashion, working with a White House that is overseen by a man who has engaged in racist activity. Racist actions, racist statements, accusing the first African-American president of not being born here, which really sort of ramped up his path to the presidency as a Republican nominee. And some of this came to a head just a couple days ago when there was a criminal justice forum at Benedict College in South Carolina. And just about all the Democratic candidates were going to be there. And before they were going to come, some of you might have seen this in the news, they gave an award. One of the participants in the conference gave an award to Donald Trump for being a bipartisan hero, or whatever they called it. And Kamala Harris, then decided to boycott, in part because they were, perhaps giving a veneer of legitimacy to Trump for his work with you on the First Step Act, but because she thought it, in some ways normalized and legitimized a guy who, outside of this area, has engaged in making racism worse in America. And there were other things too. They didn't let students attend, by and large. And then Cory Booker got involved. It was a Twitter thing, right? So it becomes a Twitter thing. People take sides. But you weighed in at some point and said you wanted to be part of the conversation. So what's the fine line that you walk here when you're engaging with political leadership of this sort and making progress, but at the same time working with someone who is also adding to the lack of progress in related areas?
Well, you know, I see this very differently than a lot of my liberal and progressive friends. First of all, does anybody here think that Donald Trump is normal? There's this whole thing. We can't do anything on any issue because if we do something on any issue, we make any progress, it's going to, quote unquote, normalize Trump. Does he seem normal to you? So literally, I don't know. He could sign 7 more bills like this. Mm-hmm. And I think that the people who don't think this is a normal presidency will still think it's a not normal presidency. So I think that for me, I look at this very, very differently. I've been working on these issues for almost 30 years. I graduated from Yale Law School. I guess it's like Yale Law School Day. I graduated from Yale Law School in 1993, before most of you were born, before some of your parents were born. I moved to the Bay Area and I started fighting. I graduated in 93. The Clinton crime bill was 94. Voters passed 3 strikes and you're out in California in 94. My entire professional life, I've been fighting the incarceration industry. And what I know is that both political parties were terrible on this issue for decades. It took both parties to get us in this ditch. Democrats, and I'm gonna be very honest about this, purchased the right to be liberal on every other issue for decades by being, quote unquote, tough on crime. You could be liberal on the environment, you could be liberal on every issue, but I'm a moderate. Why am I moderate? Because I'm, quote unquote, tough on crime. In other words, I'm willing to vote for any bill that puts more people in prison, period. And you had Democrats and Republicans racing each other off a cliff from 1988 until very recently to prove who was the quote unquote toughest on crime. And it wasn't tough on crime, it was tough on poor people, it was tough on black people, it was tough on brown people. And in California, the so-called blue nirvana, we built 20 prisons and 1 university in a 25-year period. And so the idea to me, as an African-American man who's been on the front lines fighting this stuff my entire adult life, that either of these parties have been anything but mass incarceration parties until very recently is a lie and it's ludicrous. 2008, the Democratic Party did not have a single criminal justice reform plank in its platform, not one. 2012, not one. It wasn't until 2016, after Black Lives Matter took off, that we finally got a single plank of criminal justice reform in the Democratic Party platform. So we had 2 mass incarceration parties until 2016. That's the truth. And the truth is that in my beautiful adopted state of California, Jerry Brown, liberal icon, was in federal court fighting in order to end overcrowding in our prisons, while Rick Perry in Texas was closing 8 prisons and bringing crime down and saving money. So neither party here has clean hands, number one. Number two, because Trump is so awful on so many issues, my fear when he got elected was that the tiny little progress we had been making on criminal justice reform under Obama and under a number of Republican governors.
Yes, it had become a bipartisan niche issue.
Yeah, it was
right? And you had some conservatives like the Koch brothers already talking about this, libertarians who are a different breed of conservatives. It started just getting a little traction.
Yes, and it didn't happen like, the snow falling from the sky. People like myself, people like Jessica Jackson, others were in there making those meetings happen, pulling people together, getting Newt Gingrich on board, getting people together, trying to make something happen. And there had been, Governor Deal in Georgia had passed legislation, Perry in Texas, Bryant in Mississippi. There was a set of red governors and a blue president. And we had pulled this thing together. And my great fear was that Trump was gonna come and run over it with his populist movement. And I saw what he did to immigration, which had been a bipartisan issue at one time.
Yeah.
I saw what he did to climate issues, which had been bipartisan. McCain and Obama both ran as climate champions.
Yeah.
I saw what he did to issue after issue, and I said, the next one to go will be criminal justice. But the problem with criminal justice is that I've seen Democrats head for the hills the minute Republicans open fire on that issue. I've seen Democrats abandon us over and over again. I said, I cannot allow, and I will throw my body on the tracks to prevent this issue from falling into the toilet with the rest of them, because this issue will never come back out.
And you know what Democrats are scared of, because Nixon ran on Law and Order, and then what happened with Michael Dukakis?
He got destroyed.
One furlough program. Some of you may be too young to know this, but it was he was leading George H.W. Bush for months, and there was one real commercial that showed a African-American man who got a furlough visit out of jail in Massachusetts, and he attacked a family and raped a woman and was captured and went back to jail, a guy named Willie Horton, and they tied it to Michael Dukakis, even though this program was kind of in place throughout the country. And that one thing destroyed him. So Democrats from 68 and then 88, 72, remember, they're open to this soft on crime attack.
So this became the great challenge. How do you take a Donald Trump who ran against criminal justice?
Well, talk about the Central Park Five.
I mean, these people are all quite aware of that. I don't want to waste my time on stuff you guys already know. But he ran against criminal justice reform, even on his inauguration day, his speech, American Carnage.
Yeah.
He talked about how there's crime in the cities, et cetera. And private prison stocks went through the roof when he was elected. So we were staring down the barrel of a renewed wave of mass incarceration against my community, against poor people, against people of color, and I would do anything to stop that. And the way to stop it is to get Donald Trump out of the sniper tower and down here on the ground with the rest of us to solve the problem. And the way you do that is you have to engage. But there was a fatwa issued against any liberal or any progressive who even deigned to talk to the president, because that would normalize him. You see how normal he is now? I talked to him. You see how normal he is? Don't you think he's very normal? It was complete.
Let me cut you off for 1 second here, because I think your characterization of the argument is I'm not going to say it's one-dimensional, but it may be two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional. And that is since none of those critics are here today, let me just say that I think that the argument might have been that a guy who was engaged in racist activity, demonizing the migrant community, creating crises, looking for division, that if you treat him like a normal person, but you just give him the legitimacy of the way you normally would treat a president, even when you disagree with him in policy, that you are indeed empowering him and enabling him to do these other things. Yeah. And this is the argument. It's not just, you're going to normalize them, but I think it's just a little more, I'm not saying you're wrong.
Are you going to keep talking, or do I get to respond?
Now you get to respond.
Okay, because, this is the conventional wisdom.
Right.
This is the conventional wisdom that has frozen the left in place now for 3 years. Right. And you've spoken to it quite well. I'd like to speak back to it.
Yeah.
So, does he seem normal to you? Does he seem legitimate to you? I'm just saying, the facts should matter. Yeah. He doesn't. He doesn't. It turns out that we were able to pull off a hat trick. We were able to actually get this president to sign a bill that has again restored 155,000 years of human freedom. The first wave, 91% black. The second wave, 76% black. And he's still not normal, legitimate to you or anybody else who's a critic. So it turned out that there was more space than people feared. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
is that people had a fear.
I want you to tell us why that is. Why on this issue? Because it doesn't exist in any other issue.
Yes.
The tax cuts screw the poor, including minority communities. What's happening in the immigration community. It comes to environmental justice. I mean, it's just, in every other way, anybody else who's tried, whether it's gun violence and and how that disproportionately affects the poor. Look what he said about Baltimore and Chicago. But on this one sliver, not to diminish it, but in this one, area, it didn't work out those other ways. Yeah. Why? What made this different?
Well,
other than you.
No. I mean, there's a lot of us. I mean, I'm happy to be here, but there's a lot of people who worked on this, on the left and the right. Well, let me just say, with Trump, I got 99 problems, but prisons ain't one. And that's possible. It's possible to literally oppose someone on every issue, but on the one issue you agree with them, try to get something done. I remember when Obama was in office, no matter what he did, the Republicans kicked his ass. He did stuff that the Republicans wanted him to do, and they kicked his ass.
Obamacare.
Obamacare was Romney Care.
And it came out of the Heritage
Foundation. Cap and trade came out of Heritage. He tried to do a small business tax cut. He tried to do stuff for veterans. Obama literally tried to implement half the Republicans' agenda, and they wouldn't pass it and kicked his ass. So I said, I'm never going to be like these guys. I just want you to know, some of this just moral, spiritual stuff.
Yeah.
I said, I'm not going to become what I'm fighting. I'm not going to become what I'm fighting. So, because then even if you win, you lose. But more importantly, understand something. From the liberal gaze, criminal justice is one thing. It is racial oppression and attacks on poor people. Mm-hmm. And we got to, look, I went to Yale Law School. I saw more kids doing drugs at Yale than I ever saw doing it in a housing project. So, and none of those kids went to jail. None of those kids went to jail. So nobody can tell me it was a war on drugs. It was a war on poor people who used or sold drugs.
Yeah.
But we got some nonviolent drug offenders in this room. Don't raise your hand. And
she did.
And none of you guys are going to go to prison in all likelihood. And so, so let's just be clear that from the liberal progressive point of view, we say this is the most racist system operating in the country. It's the most anti-poor system operating in the country, and that animates us. Why? Because we want justice. We don't like it when strong groups run over little groups, when majority groups run over minority groups. We see this as a justice issue. And then you say, how the hell can Donald Trump get on board with a justice issue? How can a Republican governor in Mississippi like Bryant get on board with a justice issue? It doesn't make any sense. The problem is, you talked about dimensions. The problem is, there's a whole other value system on the right that is also offended by mass incarceration. The right looks at the same issue, the same facts. Some of them, like Rand Paul, will acknowledge there's some racial issues there. Jared Kushner will acknowledge there's some racial issues there. But what they see is an attack on liberty. The best of the conservatives, the best, I didn't say all of them, but the best, has a set of values that says we believe in limited government. We believe in individual rights and dignity. We don't believe in massive government bureaucracies wasting a ton of money with no accountability. And this thing more and more looks like exactly that. A big, massive, failed government bureaucracy gobbling up liberty, gobbling up dollars with no accountability. And as many of them will say, as Christian conservatives or other conservative people of faith, by the way, where's the second chances?
Redemption.
Where's the redemption? And suddenly you begin to see on the right movements put in place by the Tea Party movement, concerned about government overreach, began to be available to this argument. And so suddenly you begin to see emerging on their own terms, not on our terms, on their own terms, a set of passionate voices that say, hold on a second, this is an anti-liberty system. And so guess what? A few people, and I will take some credit for this, reached out to each other. Van Jones and Jessica Jackson reached out to Newt Gingrich. We encouraged Mark Holden from Koch Industries to reach out to Valerie Jarrett. We began to stitch together this tiny little network of people that could understand that there's an opportunity to do something here. Because if you got everybody together, what would you have? You'd have a movement for liberty and justice for all. You suddenly have something that's very hard to stop. The problem that we ran into immediately was the balkanization, the tribalization of politics means this that I'm describing to you is not available in the conversation. Fox News is never going to give Democrats credit for having tilled the soil on this, Obama credit for having tilled the soil on this, Black Lives Matter credit for having tilled the soil on this. They're not. They're gonna say it's just Trump and he's great, and the Democrats suck. And the Democrats are not even gonna be aware that in red state after red state after red state, Georgia passed a unanimous criminal justice bill on women for dignity for incarcerated women, unanimous. And this governor signed it in Georgia months ago. MSNBC's never gonna say, well, we gotta give the Republicans credit to do it. No, screw them, Trump's a racist, next topic. And so you suddenly now have this actual movement, principled bipartisanship. This is the best of the conservatives. Because look, some of the conservatives are just terrible. And they're not gonna be moved by any of these arguments. Stephen Miller is not being moved by, Bannon, you got the word. They're not, but the best of them can be moved by this argument. And you've got the best of the progressives, not the scaredy cat ones, but the ones who really believe in justice. The best of both have come together to get something done. And I was willing personally, and would do it again and again and again, to be misunderstood, to be called all kind of names, to be called a sellout, to say you're helping Hitler, all these things. And what I would say is simply this: even if you believe this guy is Hitler, if that's this is Hitler, even if you believe that, Hitler was trying to build a fascist police and prison state. In that situation, wouldn't you want a bill that moves you away from prisons? Wouldn't you want a bill that moves you away from incarceration? So even if your analysis is correct, that would mean you'd be more aggressive about trying to bump that party and bump that White House away from more incarceration. And so I felt that in the abstract, yes, I understand. But in the concrete particulars of what it takes to actually create real roadblocks to fascism, to create real roadblocks to a country coming apart, you sometimes have to do things that the liberal conventional wisdom is not ready for and won't appreciate and will reject. But 1 year later, we have 7,000 people out of prison. And as best I can tell, in the eyes of most people here, Trump is still not normal.
So let me ask you this. In some ways, is this a fluke or not? And by that I mean, you got this bill through. Like everything, you don't get everything you want. And there are some issues with implementation, and there are people who are in the immigrant community coming out under this program and then being basically imprisoned again in the deportation system. So there are things, this happens with all legislation. But I'm more interested in whether you think this is kind of where it ends. This is as much as you get from this very bizarre coalition with Trump signing the bill, or does this actually lead to a next step? And what that next step could be, policy-wise and politically.
Let me answer narrowly and let me answer broadly.
And you got 3 minutes.
It's not the end. It's the beginning of the end of mass incarceration. It's not the end of the road. This right-left coalition has a lot more that it can get done. There's already talk of the Second Step Act, which would focus on reentry and some of the stuff that was talked about here earlier. This bill has already spawned, people say, well, it's only a federal bill, Van. Most people are locked up in state prisons. Yeah, I noticed that, but it turns out the Constitution doesn't let the federal government tell states what to do with their prisons. But it's already spawned about half a dozen copycat bills across the country and growing. First Step Act and Second Step Act. So next, I think, will be much more robust prison reentry. There could be a robust step on prosecutor misconduct. That seems to be more common ground. The more people work on this issue, the more radical they get. So even somebody who comes in very conservative, well, I only want to work on conditions of confinement. I don't want to talk about sentencing. Even inside a year in the U.S. Congress, the U.S. Congress went from conditions of confinement to sentencing reform inside of a year. So we say, I'm a good Southern kid. I was born in Tennessee. We never try to split logs with the fat end of the wedge, okay? We try to split logs with the sharp end of the wedge. Get in there a little bit and then push. So our view is there's a lot more bills, there's a lot more that we can do. The Reform Alliance is working on probation and parole reform. So a lot more that we can do, and the momentum tends to grow. Even the Koch brothers, my friend Mark Holden from Koch Industries, who I fight on every other issue, said on this issue, it was a fiscal issue for them. In this issue, they said they came in for the savings, but they stayed for the salvation once they started meeting people and understanding the depth of this thing. So what I would say about this is, narrowly, yes, there will be more bills. Trump would sign another bill tomorrow, if we could get it, one through Congress. But it's deeper than that. This network that's been developing is starting to grow. Other issues that also affect the people at the base of our parties. Poor folk in Appalachia who vote for Republicans. Poor folks in the hood who vote for Democrats. Poor folks in the barrio and Native American reservations and the border who vote for Democrats. Are not just hurt by mass incarceration. They're also hurt by the addiction crisis, the mental health crisis, by generational poverty. And what we're beginning to find is, because it's the best people in both parties that have come together, we're still going to fight on 1,000 other issues that we all care about. And please trust me, we will be fighting about guns and climate, whatever. But there are other sleeper issues that affect the people at the very bottom of the so-called least of these in red states and blue states, that the best in both parties, now that we've found each other, are going to continue to work together. You will be surprised as we go forward that some of the healing in the country will come from this sort of bottom-up bipartisanship based on common pain in red parts and blue parts of our country, trying to find some common purpose.
I hope you're right. Because I think it's pretty clear that healing often takes longer than injury.
Absolutely.
And so whatever we've been through the last few years and what we're going to go through still for some more years, the healing is going to have to be there for a long time afterwards. Thank you, Van. Thank you for letting me be part of this night. Thank you all for being with us, too.
Very, very good.
Okay, very good.
I think that Louis Reed's going to come back out and do something. So I'll take my phone and get out the way. Thank you.
Another round of applause for Van Jones. Van, one of the things that I think about Van Jones and his brilliance as it relates to his leadership is that he has no compunction about creating space for people such as myself, people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system, and being able to share space with him on some of the world's biggest platforms, on some of the world's biggest stages. And while there are other things that contribute to his genius, in my mind, that is one of the most excellent things that I love about Van Jones. So one more time, round of applause for Van Jones. Absolutely. You guys having a good time tonight? Good, good, good. I'm just pleased to be here tonight. I'm pleased to be able to have the voices of people who have been impacted by our criminal justice system, voices such as Marcus Bullock, who's doing just such a phenomenal thing with Flikshop, voices such as Michael Mendoza and his leadership as it relates to Cut 50, voices such as Pamela Wynn, who you heard a very, very riveting story about. It takes a degree of strength. It takes a degree of just grit, just to come on here and present the way that we do. So as we are bringing them back up, let's give another round of applause for our panelists as we transition into our Q&A section. This would be the time that our panelists would come out. This would be the time. There we go. So we have some questions that our esteemed panelists are going to be taking. Some of you have submitted some questions that's really going to put people in the hot seat. So the first question. What would be your top 3 to 5 items that Black America could rally behind leading up to the 2020 election and beyond? I think that I'll toss that question over to Marcus first.
Oh, to me?
That was real.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to give that one a little bit more thought. I want to be a little bit more thoughtful in that one. It's a big question. 3 things. Yeah, let me get that one a little bit more thought. I digress. Take it away.
I'm gonna still that 3 things that they could get behind. First of all, mass incarceration is real. And if it's gonna be a federal issue, we need to think about the ways in which the president can actually exert pressure on states. So if you go back to the 1994 crime bill, you know that President Bill Clinton exerted pressure on the states to get them to get rid of parole in terms of truth in sentencing. So one issue is to think seriously about the ways in which the president can exert pressure on the states to peel back the kind of initiatives that made mass incarceration possible. So that's one. The second initiative, I think, would think seriously about the way in which the sentencing laws allow mass incarceration to exist in a sort of profound way. So if you got a judge who could sentence somebody to life in prison for robbery, and they have you can sentence them 5 years to 95 years in Louisiana, right? It's impossible to imagine a judge having any kind of real discretion. So that's the second issue. And the third issue, because me and Marcus got locked up as teenagers, I think that we should take seriously the idea that juveniles should not be in prison with adults. And when we say how we should, but the reason why I think this is an issue is because me and Marcus carjacked somebody. And so if you want to take the issue seriously, you have to both think about what it means to have 2 young men who carjack somebody who do not deserve to be in prison, but also to think about somebody in your community who was robbed, and what is an adequate response to that. So those 3 things, like maybe we can't figure out the answer, but a presidential candidate, we should expect to have thought thoughtfully about what that should require. So those are my 3 big issues, all involving mass incarceration.
Thank you so much.
What he said.
Jessica Jackson, is the Trump administration doing enough for prison justice reform, and what is it like working with members of the Trump administration?
All right. Well, first, I get asked a lot, how I'm a Democrat. I've been a lifelong Democrat. I was an Obama delegate to the convention. I ran for office as a Democrat. So I get asked a lot, why would I ever work with people in the Trump administration? And I just I'm gonna involve you guys for a second. How many of you, when you were sitting in a cell, thought to yourself, I wanna go home, but damn, I hope it's not a Republican who lets me go home?
No, I thought that.
It didn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Right?
It didn't matter.
So-
Set me free.
So when Van and I got asked to come to the White House the first time and meet with Jared Kushner, we didn't hesitate because they have 200,000 people in the federal prisons that we knew there was a shot we might possibly be able to help. And because there was even a slim chance we might be able to get something done and bring folks like Lonnie home, we had to go there. It was our responsibility as people who are advocating for criminal justice reform. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say it was always easy, right? Think about all the stuff that happened last year while we're walking in and out of the White House, right? First day we ever went there was the day that the Parkland students went there. And we had to walk by all of them in line and walk in, looking at their faces and knowing nothing was gonna happen on gun control, right? We were there while all the separations at the border started coming to light. It wasn't easy, but there were folks inside that building, Jared Kushner and his team, who actually had been impacted themselves. Jared's father had gone to prison. And the very first time I talked to him, he started telling me a story about what it was like to visit his dad in prison. And not just his dad, but the people who were in there with his dad. And what it was like to hear their stories and find out when they were coming home that his dad had helped them get ready to re-enter and find jobs. So there were people in there who were dedicated to this issue. We try to stay away from other issues and talking about those, but we felt like it was our duty to try and find that common ground.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, one of the things I always say is that people in the prison house don't care who's in the White House so long as they can get home to their mama's house. And I think that that's what Jessica was articulating. Michael, what role do you see incarcerated workers playing in the justice movement?
You know, I don't know if many of you know, but currently right now in California, Northern California, there are crazy fires going on right now. A lot of people are being displaced and their properties being endangered, and so are many lives. What a lot of people don't know is that some of the people that are fighting those fires are currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. And they only make about $1 an hour. But yet they're risking their lives to save other lives. And so I'm gonna embarrass somebody. One of my colleagues out here, our policy director, actually put together a great policy idea for next year, which is dignity for incarcerated workers. His name is Esteban Nunez. He's out there somewhere. But it's an important issue because incarcerated workers represent what we still see today as slave wages within our prison systems. They get paid as little as 8 cents an hour to the most as 90 cents an hour. And on top of that, you owe thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in restitution. So by the time you get home, not only do you have little to your savings, but you owe more than you actually have. And so it's looking at how we can increase these wages for incarcerated workers to minimum wage so that they can make a livable wage, so that they can have savings upon reentry and not worry about so many barriers that they face financially. And so incarcerated workers have a lot to offer our societies. We just need to be able to provide them the right resources that they need.
Pamela, why do you think the Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act and other similar bills did not gain enough bipartisan support, but the First Step Act did?
Well, unfortunately, women are the fastest growing population to be incarcerated. However, we are the least talked about when it comes to criminal justice reform. So just like out here, women, we've always been fighting for our rights. We still fight for rights, for equal pay, and so on and so on. It's the same in the criminal justice system. Women are not deemed as important as the men, and we're left out of a lot of the conversations. So as a woman, it's my job that I'm out here now to speak up and make sure I keep us in the conversations and in the rooms to make sure they know that we're present and make sure that they do what they need to do for us.
I want to toss this question over to Lonnie. Considering your pre-collegiate experience prior to incarceration, what would you say to young college students who are passionate about fighting for criminal justice but don't know where to start?
Well, for the college students, I would say don't lose your way, right? Because we see that the criminal justice system is not acting out or playing out what it was designed for. It's more of retribution instead of reformation and rehabilitation. So being that the college students, they the future of society, don't lose your way in in the purpose of incarceration. And not only that, because we know y'all are the future, and the youth that's younger than us are the future. So and also we have to keep that in mind, and then we also have to go to the neighborhoods where these young kids are being destroyed and destroying themselves because they don't have no guidance. And we got to get in the mud with these kids and stop them from coming into these prison systems where we ain't got to have conversations like this as much. We stop it at the gate before we even get to there. Being that y'all college students, y'all need to go out there, and us on this panel also, that got a second chance at life, we got to go back out there and help them children not make the same choices that we made. And that's why I say to the college students.
And I'd like to add to that, we also need to bring the Pell Grant back for incarcerated people. And we need to take that convicted felon question off of the college applications.
I'm going to ask Jessica to piggyback on that as well. What would you think would be the singular thing, and/or how can we move students who are on college campuses to social justice action?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is people on campus need to realize the privilege they have and the access that they have. You're a college student. That means grown-ups out there in the professional field want to talk to you. People want to hear from you. They're excited to mentor you. They're excited to be a part of your journey. So if you can use that platform to start advocating for this issue, and if you can create access for somebody who maybe isn't in college, right? If you can find somebody who's been impacted by the system, or find a kid who's got a parent who's incarcerated, bring them around with you to college events, introduce them to people, show them what a college education can do for you, what kind of different path, what kind of access you can get from having your education. I think that's one of the most important ways that you can get involved, and like Lauren was saying, you can prevent, people from going down that path.
Thank you. Michael, someone who is here from DC, they asked, how can local DC offenders get assistance in any form from Cut 50?
Can you repeat that question?
How can people who are from the DC greater community, how can they get any assistance from Cut 50 in any way, shape, or form?
Go see Lewis Reed after this event. He can tell you all about our empathy network. Our empathy network is across 50 states where we bring people together that are impacted by the criminal justice system and provide a support network where we can all communicate as one and figure these solutions out together. And so if you want to be a part of the empathy network, talk to Lewis Reed and he'll plug you in.
I'm going to jump in on that too. So also here in DC, a lot of people who end up getting in trouble end up going into the federal system. Cut 50, after passing the First Step Act, which, by the way, I don't think any of us slept the entire year, but after passing that, we knew that we weren't done. We knew people were coming home and people were going to need resources. So we got to work with the Empathy Network, and we wrote what's called the First Step to Second Chances Guide with Root and Rebound, another great organization. If you know people who have been impacted by incarceration or have loved ones who have been impacted by incarceration, please tell them to visit the Cut 50 site to download that guide. It's got a list of people and resources that can help find jobs, find housing. Cut 50 was able to secure, Lewis was able to secure counseling hours for people, free counseling, so that people can talk about the trauma that they went through and get some help for everything they experienced while incarcerated. And they've also got Lyft credits for people who are coming home if they need to get rides back and forth to job interviews, back and forth to the first few weeks of their new jobs. They've got some credits. So I think if you know people who were impacted, even if they didn't get out right under the First Step Act, there are some resources that Cut 50 has available to help them get back on their feet.
So final question, I'm going to ask that everyone answer this, beginning with Pam. How can society and/or individuals fight the dehumanization and criminalization of ex-felons? How can society and/or individuals fight the dehumanization and criminalization of ex-felons?
The first thing you can do is remember that everyone that is incarcerated is somebody's loved one. They're a mother, they're a father, a sister, a brother. They have family, they have people that love them. The next thing you need to know is that 90% of the people that are incarcerated are gonna return back home. And how do you want your people to return back home? These people are gonna live next to you. They're gonna interact with your kids. They're gonna be at your grocery store because they're gonna have to live in society and work alongside of you. So remember that they're just like you, they're no different. They just made a mistake, but they have been held accountable for that mistake. Allow them another chance.
Jessica.
Well, I think it's an uphill battle to fight the negative narrative that's been spun about people who have been incarcerated or have committed a crime. And I think we all can play a part in that. I know Cut 50 puts out a lot of really great content, a lot of stories of people who have come home, the great things that they're doing now So I think you can share that content, you can share the message that Pam just impressed upon you, that these are folks who, yes, they've made a bad decision somewhere along the way, which, by the way, we all have, and they do deserve a second chance.
Well, I think people need to look at what if it was their family or their loved one? How would you want them to be treated or looked at? When it hits home, it becomes more real. Just like when they was trying to pass this act, Jared Kushner, it hit home. It was real. So when it hits home and you look like that could have been my son or that could have been my father, then you start to realize that we human, we make mistakes, and the second chance is warranted to everyone. We can't just look at it like somebody made a mistake and throw them away. So I think that aspect of it has to be taken into consideration.
Michael.
I'm just going to read a Martin Luther King quote that I've just been stuck on. And it says, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." And if we really want to continue to change this system and help people come home to live better lives, we have to embrace everybody with love coming home to continue to make that difference.
Marcus.
Continue to tell the stories. I love the fact that, Cut 50 is very intentional about bringing people that are being directly impacted by the system onto this kind of stage to share space with you all, but share the stories. And I think that if we continue to share the stories, then we'll continue to begin to change the narrative. And that happens only at dinner table conversations. It doesn't really happen on Capitol Hill, right? It happens well before people come to work to get to Capitol Hill. It happens at the dinner table conversations. And I think that that's one way to do it. And if you're looking for a way to, and this is not a shameless plug, kind of, sort of, but not a shameless plug. If you're looking for a way to be able to tell that story, so I had a TED Talk that recently dropped a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about the importance of support from the community and how we can band together to begin to do just that. So search out my TED Talk. You can just Google Marcus Bullock or something, and you'll find that. And you can allow that to be your tool that you can use to continue to share these kinds of stories.
And last but not least.
I think, I'm going to double down on what Marcus said. I think truth is, if I'd have came home and shot 3 people, I'd have been featured in the fucking presidential ad. It'd be right now running. I might have been featured in 2 or 3 ads by now. I went to Yale Law School, and half the people in this audience don't know who the fuck I am. So what I would say, really, is to take my success as seriously as you would take my failure. And he said it's a shameless plug, but I'm telling you, we all know who Willie Horton is, and that shit is not a joke. But when I decided that I was going to go to law school, I Googled convicted felon at Yale Law School, and a name popped up. And when that name popped up, I knew that I could make it happen. So if you say, what can you do? Beyond the rhetoric, beyond attending meetings, beyond the conversations, when I send somebody a link to Marcus's TED Talk, they watch it. Watch the TED Talk. It ain't a shameless plug. People plug our ruin all of the time, and they never feel bad about it. But us sitting here, he was 15 years old when he went to prison. They didn't send us to prison with kids. I was 16, and we not from Virginia. When we went to prison, they said, you figure it out on your own. This man been married for like a decade. His mama married me, she in the audience. Our stories and narratives are unknown, but if we go outside right now and put a pistol to somebody's head, we'll be at the center of a campaign ad. So if you ask me what you could do, you don't need to humanize me, but you could tell the story, and you could start with like checking out his TED Talk and sending it to 3, 4, 5 friends. Mm-hmm. The same exact way that if they were trying to like pass the counter to the First Step Act, they would send the story of my ruin to millions of people. Mm-hmm. I would say that that's what we could do. Like, don't leave here and say, oh, I saw these dudes, they were really impressive, and leave it at that. You get the TED Talk, and you send it to 10 people, and you say, look, we need to know these stories. Because if mass incarceration is real, the possibility of these stories is what counter it.
Eloquently expressed. Thank you so much. So where do we go from here? Where do we go from here as an audience? Where do we go from here as a family? Where do we go from here as a community? I'm glad that you asked. Because we have 3 specific actions that we want you to take. First and foremost, if you did not hear me, if my microphone happened to be down earlier when we were on the first panel, you can text the word justice to 97483. You can text the word justice to 97483. If some of you were late when you were coming in and you did not hear our first panel discussion, you can text the word 97483. If some of you ran out and you had the old flip phones and you traded that in between time for a smartphone, you can text the word justice to 97483. The second thing that you can do, you can follow us on social media. We are at Cut 50 on any social media channel. You can follow us on social media. The third action, this is very simple, this is very impromptu. I want to ask everyone to stand. Ask everyone to stand. Everyone to stand. See how the lights come up? Anybody in here ever been to church? Show of hands. Okay. Anybody in here ever been to black church? In black church, there's something that we have call and response. It's called call and response. That means that if I say amazing, you say grace. All right. So Van has a chant. And he opened up with it at the outset of this program. He said, when we fight, we win. 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 The reason why we are going to win is because all of you are part of the Empathy Network, and as a result of such, we are going to continue to do great work. We are going to do great exploits, and we are going to continue to change this system beyond anything this generation has seen. Round of applause for all of our panelists. Round of applause for Van Jones. Thank you for coming out. God bless you. Good night.